in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. This is Buck Joffrey, and today my guest on the show is Linda Tyler. She's the author of the plant-based anti-inflammatory cookbook, Delicious Whole Food Recipes to Reduce Inflammation and Promote Health. Her website is graciousvegan.com. Linda, thanks for being on the program.
Thank you for having me, Buck. It's great to be here.
So, obviously you've got an interest in the plant-based diet. What got you interested in this, and ultimately, writing a cookbook on it?
Yeah, so I became a vegetarian in college several decades ago, and I really resonated with the animal welfare reason, and so for quite a while, it was don't kill animals for our food. That was my mindset, and I didn't eat meat. And then a number of years ago, I started reading articles on dairy farms and egg farms and realized they were pretty cruel to the animals there too. So I turned vegan. But it wasn't until I went to a conference in 2015 that I heard about healthy plant-based eating. I heard Dr. Michael Greger speak, T. Colin Campbell speak, just a number of speakers. I had no idea that this arena and all this research existed on the health benefits of plant-based eating. So I went home and I volunteered to work on Dr. Greger's website, and I started converting my cooking to healthy plant-based eating. And, I've been cooking my whole life since I was a little girl, and I had just started my website, graciousvegan.com. And so I've always had sort of these research chops, and then I have my cooking, and I wanted to share recipes, and gradually inflammation emerged as something that I kept seeing in so many places. And I thought, what a great way to offer value, to explain what inflammation is. And now they know a lot about certain foods that actually help calm inflammation. And certainly a plant-based diet helps calm inflammation as well. So I wanted to put it all together. And then I've been learning photography. So it was the perfect vehicle for me to share, and I hope help people by writing the plant-based anti-inflammatory cookbook.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, a lot of people talk about the anti-inflammatory benefits. Why don't you comment on your take on why a plant-based diet in particular is something for anti-inflammatory benefits?
Sure. So the way I explain inflammation is that inflammation is the result of our immune system doing its job, or in some cases, overdoing its job. So as the immune cells, the billions of immune cells that are on alert all over our body, as they react to what they perceive as invaders, or things that need to be cleaned up, irregularities, as they react to those and try to get rid of them, they cause inflammation, added, swelling and pain and redness, and sometimes collateral tissue damage. So the goal is to eliminate the things that trigger the immune system and trigger those immune cells to go into action, because that's their action, is to swell places and bring more cells in, and that's what causes the inflammation. So, the immune cells react to plaque that's on our coronary arteries and make things worse because those arteries get swollen. And they react to smoke. If you smoke, that triggers. And then the other thing that can trigger it is diet. So especially things like saturated fat and refined sugar and refined grains, those cause the body to have oxidation levels that the immune system wants to help. Saturated fat can cause, an imbalance in the gut microbiome that the immune cells respond to. Saturated fat can make the gut leaky,
Sure.
which lets other things into the blood system that the immune system reacts to. Even excess body fat releases triggers of the immune system. So in all these cases, if we can we calm inflammation by eliminating the things that trigger our immune cells to want to clean up, if
Right.
you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
that's how I explain it. And through diet, we can make a big difference in terms of getting the immune system to calm down.
And I definitely, I there's no doubt diet is has a big role here in general in terms of inflammation. I guess the question that I have, and let's just take all of the other reasons that people would want to be vegetarian out. Okay, religious reasons, political reasons, things like that, which are very reasonable. There's no reason to argue on those points. But what I'd really like to drill down in is this sort of idea that somehow plant-based diets are in a way superior to other diets, because frankly, I don't know that I have seen the evidence of that. For example, you can take Mediterranean diet, right? Mediterranean diet, which includes fish, poultry, dairy, and it's shown to significantly reduce markers of inflammation. So what is it about the arbitrary line of sort of, not including fish or chicken if you're talking about saturated fat, there's plenty of ways to get saturated fat in a vegan diet. You could eat Oreo cookies on a vegan diet, right? And so,
right.
So, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I really am curious, because this is stuff that I think we've got to really drill down on. I don't know that I have seen evidence to suggest that just because it's plant-based means it's superior.
Right. Certainly, I want to make a distinction between vegan and healthy plant-based, because you're absolutely right. There's tons of processed vegan foods, tons of saturated fat in processed vegan foods. And so, there's a term junk food vegan, which is a very real possibility. You can eat vegan pizza, vegan ice cream, and those will deliver tons of saturated fat, which is not good for inflammation. So you're absolutely right in terms of vegan. Now, healthy plant-based is a different story. There's very little saturated fat in a healthy plant-based diet. The only foods I know of is coconut and palm. But a healthy plant-based diet doesn't use coconut oil or palm oil or really any processed oil, because oil is a processed food. So what I'm saying and what the evidence shows, there's a meta-analysis of, a couple dozen studies, I think it's 39 studies on inflammation markers, studying diets at a macro level. And a plant-based diet does have over and over, it's shown that it is more anti-inflammatory than a standard American diet. Now, there's lots between healthy,
right.
That's so it's not all or nothing. Yeah. So like hot dogs and sausage, at one end, and pure healthy whole plant-based diet at the other. There's lots in between. And so Mediterranean and DASH and MIND, there's a lot of diets. If followed closely, they're much closer to the healthy plant-based diet, than to the standard American diet. So I'm not advocating meat or no meat or, sorry, Charlie. So it's important. I take your point. It's important to know. But, beef does have significant saturated fat. Cheese does too.
Well, I guess my question then is that, I think, why not focus the variable on saturated fat rather than, what I mean? If you're looking at this, and you've talked about this, coming at this from a research perspective, your variable that you keep bringing up is saturated fat. So there's certainly ways to get us, a diet that is not high in saturated fat while still eating fish and chicken potentially. And so I'm curious on that particular variable. And this isn't a I'm not I'm not trying to like sort of get you kind of thing. I'm just more than anything, I'm just trying to understand what the theory is. I mean, why use the variable of meat when you're really, you're coming back to saturated fat?
Yeah, and saturated fat is not the only trigger of inflammation. I apologize if I made it seem like that's the only one. That's sort of the easiest one to explain. But, the chicken has a lot of omega-6s compared to how much omega-3 it has. And that becomes arachidonic acid, which can also be, while it has some anti-inflammatory properties, also has inflammatory processes. So while chicken has much less saturated fat, it has some issues around the omega-6s.
Right.
And fish, can have bioaccumulation of toxins. Toxins are inflammatory. So, if we lined everything up, there could be some animal foods that are less inflammation triggers than others. And so, again, I'm not saying all or nothing, but I do think that, I think that following a whole food plant-based diet is a way to just sort of easily avoid those things. And I believe that, then you don't have to worry about those, mercury or other things that can come in through fish, or, you don't have to worry about the salt they put into most chicken. So, I guess I tried to direct my cookbook not to saying you should go fully plant-based, but to say, here are plant-based solutions.
I see. In terms of just, I guess, just so we can at least talk, we have a topic to kind of continue down. I guess plant-based diets in general. You did mention some of the things that you want to avoid with fish. Certain types of fish may have mercury and that kind of thing. But there are certain things that I think in a plant-based diet that you are sometimes missing as well. And vitamin B12, iron, maybe not as much. A big one is omega-3 fatty acids, which fish are huge, and we are learning more and more about the significant value of omega-3 fatty acids. So how do you respond to, say, concerns about nutritional deficiencies? And I guess in a real world scenario, because listen, I get it. If you are really sort of keyed in on nutritional things that you need, you're going to get it. My concern tends to be that there's a lot of people, for example, in Southern California who are vegan, who probably are not getting enough protein, probably are not getting enough omega fatty acids. And they're just vegan, right? And how do you make up for that? How do you ensure balanced and complete plant-based diet?
That's a good question. I know that, that's not a question just for vegans, but it's also a question for lots of people who don't understand what they might be short in. Lots of people are, deficient in vitamin D and should find out their vitamin D levels and do what they need to do to remedy that. So when I work with students, we always talk about vitamin B12. They need to have a supplement of vitamin B12. But that evidently is becoming an issue for meat eaters too, because originally vitamin B12 was, it's based naturally in bacteria that are in the dirt. And so when animals used to graze, they would get lots of vitamin B into their system, and that would pass to humans. Now they're fed processed food, basically, and they don't get a lot of vitamin D. So even meat eaters can be vitamin B12 deficient. So I talk to my students about vitamin B, vitamin D, which is an issue for everybody. Also about omega-3s. There is a kind of omega-3 that's easy for everybody to get, but there's another kind that's harder for vegans to get. And I do, based on the experts I pay attention to and follow, I do recommend an omega-3 algae-based supplement for that. And then we talk about iodine. If people are really cutting down on salt a lot, which can contribute to inflammation, then we talk about how to get iodine, either through a supplement or through seaweed.
Got it. What about the omega fatty acids? That one's a pretty big one. Where do you try to make up with that?
So I eat a lot of flaxseed and chia seeds, and your body can convert some of that to, there's 3 kinds of omega-3 fatty acids. There's the ALA, that's easy, the EPA, and the EHA that are harder to get for vegans. But so I take a supplement for those that is derived from algae. You can get a yeast-derived one as well. So that's what I recommend to my students if they are, 100% plant-based.
Yeah.
There is a school of thought that if you're not eating a lot of meat and animal products, your body is freed up to convert all that flaxseed and chia seed into the other 2 kinds of omega-3s. But I pay attention to, my experts still say to go ahead and take the supplement.
Right, of course. How about protein quality issues? Certainly, the animal proteins are considered complete proteins. In other words, you can get your source of all amino acids that you need by, if you're taking whey protein or any kind of other animal protein. And whereas with plants, I mean, you have a few that are non-essential amino acids that you need to make sure that you supplement. And again, my question is, how do you make sure you get those if you're going to be vegetarian or vegan? Carefully, right? Again, this is not for probably people who are studying this, but people who are just going to be vegan and potentially can end up with a nutritional deficiency because they are unaware.
Yeah, that's right. So there used to be, I don't know if you remember the Diet for a Small Planet with the complementary proteins and, packing rice and cheese and, beans and quinoa together. And so that has been debunked, that in the same meal, you need to eat complementary foods so that you have complete proteins. Actually, as you know, our body sort of keeps a rolling pool of amino acids, and those amino acids go into the cells, and the cells put together the proteins. I think one of the most common misunderstandings is that, we eat something with protein in it, and that protein directly goes to the muscle. But actually, everything we eat is broken down. It goes into this pool of amino acids, and the body builds the proteins it needs. There are, thousands and thousands of types of proteins. Right. So they have to be kind of custom built all the time by the body. So, everything I have heard and the way, my body and other people I've talked to is if you eat a well-balanced, a decently balanced diet, that includes beans and legumes and some grains, especially those, but also vegetables. But, the main proteins come from beans and grains, that your body takes care of balancing out those amino acids. There are some foods in the vegan diet that are complete proteins, like meat, like soybeans and quinoa. They have all the 21 essential amino acids. But just sort of eating a lot of diversity not only helps the gut microbiome, but it also helps that pool of amino acids.
Got it. And, there certainly is, just for clarity, there is some differences in bioavailability of proteins. Sometimes I liken this to puzzle pieces. Certain amino acids come together, and they're basically creating these small proteins called peptides. And typically what happens is there is an efficiency element, not that you can't overcome. But with animal proteins, they tend to resemble, they are the same proteins that we often need ourselves. So there is less of a disassembling and reassembling process there than there is with plant proteins. That's not to say that you can't get what you need. But again, I would argue that this is something that probably a lot of people are under. They're not getting enough protein. I think, in fact, it's even hard to get enough protein even when you are an omnivore. That's what I realized that, most people who are working out should be getting close to, a gram per pound. And to do that with a vegetarian or vegan diet is probably, it's going to be a big challenge, but I mean, certainly doable.
Yeah, I know that Robert Cheek and Matt Fraser, who wrote The Plant-Based Athlete, cited a lot of studies showing, you may not need as much protein as you think in terms of bodybuilding and other, hardcore fitness workout.
Well, I'm just talking about sarcopenia. I'm just talking about preventing sarcopenia. So, But, that's another issue entirely, I guess, is just, the amount of protein. Let me ask you this. In terms of, another question I would have is just in terms of plant-based diets, in a way, I mean, you tend to see this in, if you're in Southern California, you're in Miami or whatever. And I think one of the critiques is that this diet done right may not really be accessible for everyone, given the cost, fresh produce, plant-based products. How do you address those concerns, I guess, at the socioeconomic level? And I'm sure you've thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, the anti-inflammatory superstars that I talk about in my cookbook and the recipes that I have, almost everything is accessible in a grocery store, a regular grocery store. And so being a cooking teacher, I can't assume everybody's going to go to specialized markets or farmers markets or have a bunch of different appliances. So I kind of try to stick to the basics, especially in terms of grocery store ingredients. And certainly people live in food deserts and don't have access to enough fresh produce. I don't think that's a reason to advocate for more plant-based eating, but it's certainly a reason to, be active in trying to advocate for more fresh food for especially city dwellers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, and city dwellers, I guess specifically, I mean, the cost of these kinds of things is pretty significant, right? So a lot of times you see people eating fast food and all that. What's your take on some of these products that are being created for plant-based diets, like the Impossible Burger and all that, which actually creates, these are essentially like hyper-processed foods too, aren't they? I mean, what is
they are.
So what's your take on that and what your, how do you view it?
Right. They are, very processed. They're trying to mimic the mouthfeel and the taste of meat. Mm-hmm. And their goal, I think is to reach meat eaters who love the taste of meat. And so those are not foods that I eat, but though I believe the mission statements are around animal welfare. Yeah. Let's try to, get fewer animals bred and killed for meat. Let's just create things that are made of plants that taste good and would satisfy those who love a hamburger. And I think they're succeeding. Right. But for me, I don't eat those. They are processed. They're not as high as beef in saturated fat. They have saturated fat. I believe their protein levels are pretty high though. Sure. And that's something they wanted to achieve. So I believe one of them uses a pea protein isolate, and I believe the other one uses a soybean protein isolate. Uh-huh. So, I think I guess it's a different market. Yeah. The animal welfare person in me is glad that people are eating those because those people probably. Right.
But it may not be like sort of
argument. They don't want it.
Right. It may not be the health argument per se. Right. This is
definitely. No, not the health argument. You're right.
Got it. What am I missing? I don't want to. I want to make sure we get your main, the things that you want to talk about out there. You know, I was just curious on a lot of these questions, so I've just been bombarding you, but I also want to make sure that I'm giving you a chance to talk about things that you think are important for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you know, people, it's easy to, I feel like inflammation can be a silent way that we're making our bodies more vulnerable to disease. So people have heard a lot about inflammation, and I want them to understand what it is and how they can help protect themselves and help themselves age more vigorously and vitally, because it does catch up with you. So this is, you know, a way to help prevent future disease and frailty. So I want to kind of help people there, even if they're not suffering from an autoimmune condition or
Sure.
allergies where the inflammation is super obvious. There is inflammation, and as we age, it can get worse. So I wanted to come up with, you know, a friendly way of describing it, you know, summarize some of the research about some of the foods that are extra anti-inflammatory, and then, of course, create recipes that are doable, feasible, with grocery store ingredients that people could start to make. And I hope, like in the case of an easy blueberry smoothie, I have that every day.
Right.
So I get a half a cup of berries. That's my goal, is to get at least a half a cup of berries every day. So I make this smoothie. So that's in the cookbook. And some dinners and some salads and desserts. So I'm hoping it just creates a way that people can see a path toward, wow, I could increase my plant-based eating. And if they're, you know, everybody's on a journey, if they're, you know, maybe they're already at healthy plant-based eating, maybe they don't want to go all the way, as you've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Or somewhere in between, that they can integrate some of these things and habits into their daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. I mean, certainly there's a you know, whether you go all in or not, there's a lot of value in plant-based and having a lot of plant-based food in your diet. So again, the cookbook itself is called the Plant-Based Anti-Inflammatory Cookbook, delicious whole food recipes to reduce inflammation and promote health. Linda, you can, your website is graciousvegan.com. I appreciate your time, and good luck with the book.
Thank you. And I really had a great time. Thanks for letting me be your guest.
Be right back. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Linda. Now, it was actually really nice of her to be on the show, and hopefully I didn't come across as overly hostile or anything. I think, you know, to a certain extent, I am reacting to what I perceive as what I think is a misguided attempt by certain vegans to give a scientific legitimacy to what really is a larger political movement. I have to say, though, you know, listen, first of all, I'm not anti-vegan. I'm not anti-plant-based. I mean, I'm not talking about the global issues or the environment. I just don't know enough about that stuff. What I am an expert on is, you know, looking at this from the diet side of things, right? What I'm commenting on is this idea that somehow a vegan diet is scientifically proven to provide better health than any other kind of diet. And I think it's important because this topic has been in social media a lot lately, because there was a Netflix series called You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment, and people have been talking about that quite a bit. And so I think it's probably a good idea for me to put my 2 cents into that. For those of you who don't know, this is a study that compared the effects of vegan and omnivorous diets in sets of identical twins. Now, omnivorous, of course, means you eat everything, right? You're an omnivore. You're not a herbivore or a carnivore. You're an omnivore. You eat everything. Vegan is basically a plant-based only diet. Okay, so this study did is they took, I think it was like 20 sets of identical twins, and they compared them. The idea here is that the identical twins created some sort of genetic control to compare these diets in the studies. And so each twin got randomized to one side or the other, either omnivore diet or a vegan diet. Study lasted for about 8 weeks. And at the time, again, one of the twins was given a vegan diet, one of the omnivore diet. And these meals themselves, though, were prepared meals, so it's not like they told people to go home and just eat a vegan diet or eat an omnivore diet. What the study found was that while both groups experienced reductions in body weight and LDL cholesterol, the vegan group showed greater decreases, particularly in LDL cholesterol. So does that mean then, based on the findings here, that a plant-based only diet makes you lose weight and makes your cholesterol lower? That is, I guess, the idea that they were trying to sort of prove. The reality is we don't really know that does that at all, because this study really didn't prove anything. Now let's talk about why. Now, the meals, they were prepared, as I mentioned, but they were not adequately controlled at all. Specifically, the vegan diet contained a meaningfully fewer calories than the omnivorous diet. And the vegan diet twins also showed a lot less satisfaction in their meals than the omnivorous ones. So, in other words, the vegan side was given these meals that were, in the first place, they had less calories. And then second of all, they didn't taste as good. So the vegan diet people might not have eaten as much because it didn't taste as good. So less caloric food that tastes worse certainly is the most likely cause for the weight loss, right? I mean, we can say that. You had less calories and you didn't like it. So it's probably more likely why it caused the weight loss. And the LDL reductions, the reductions in cholesterol, well, what does the doctor tell you to do when your cholesterol is high? Well, one of the things we know will help with your lipid profile is if you lose weight. So losing more weight itself could be the reason for the LDL cholesterol number reduction in the vegan group. The other thing is, not only were those calories not kept constant, but between the groups, the food nutritional composition wasn't even close. In other words, they didn't keep the same amount of saturated fat in each type of meal. And, the vegan side here who, believes this study might say, well, hey, vegan stuff doesn't have as much saturated fat. But I'll tell you what, I've been to vegan restaurants with lots of fried food that have plenty of saturated fat. So it is not something that you can't match if you wanted to match it. So the study didn't really isolate the variable of plant-based versus not plant-based at all, really. And the differences in calorie intake and fat composition between the diet groups could have influenced any observed outcome. So do vegan diets provide better health outcomes than omnivorous ones? The reality is it might, but we don't have any reason to believe that based on the arbitrary distinction that was made in the diets alone here. So now, listen, if you have religious or political reasons to be vegan, great. That's not what I'm arguing here. I'm going purely on the science, purely on, what this study was trying to prove. And, the problem is that, again, what I don't like about this is that it was pretty political, right? And I get it, but I'd rather they just be honest about the motivation of these studies rather than trying to slip in pseudoscience to try to prove a point and get people to think that was a superior diet. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on this. I know you may have heard about this in in social media already, so I wanted to just give you a little bit of color on that.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am in fact a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.